Good to Sichas Chelek Chav Gimel, the Sicha of Masei Aleph, Lili Nishmas Rabbi Yosef Ben Yamin Ben Reb Menashe Kaltman. Why is this parsha called Masei? Masei means journeys. If you look in the parsha, you'll see all the different stops that the Yidden made. Why are we focusing on the journey and not on the stops in the name of the parsha? After was the pasuk sagt Eila Masei B'nai Yisrael, and the fact that the pasuk says these are the journeys of the Yidden, and is the noch mefarad di ala erter, and then lists the various different places, 42 different places where the Yidden stopped to rest, to camp. Frektmen, many of the Mefarshim ask the following question: since what's being mentioned are the places where they stopped along the long journey, we're obviously not here to tell us about the journeys that took place between the stops. Rather, if you look in the Chumash, you'll see it's talking about the places where they camped, where they stopped their journeys. So the pasuk should have began by saying not these are the journeys of the Yidden, but these are the stops, these are the encampments of the Yidden. These are the places where the Yidden stopped along the way and rested. Nochmer, as a matter of fact, before we go to Nochmer, I'll just point out what he says in the order 2, that if you look in Rashi on this pasuk, Rashi explains why is it speaking about the Masei, about the journeys of the Yidden. So the first pshat in Rashi is that Rashi is coming to tell us the kindness of Hashem. That despite the fact that they had to be in the desert for 40 years, they didn't have to wander the whole time. Many of that time, they were able to be resting or camping and not constantly traveling. And Rashi makes the whole cheshbon based on where the stops were, when they were, that it turns out that most of the time they were actually not traveling or wandering. So according to that, then the focus is taka on the journey. But the second pshat in Rashi brings a mashal that a king was taking his son, and he showed him, this is where we slept, this is where we cooled off. So then it's about the places where they stopped along the way. Also in the Tanchuma, it says that because these places received the Yidden stayed there, therefore these places were rewarded by Hashem later. So again, it's about the places. So the question becomes, why are we calling it Masei, which is the journey? Why don't we say Elechaniya? You see, there's the places where the Yidden stopped and camped. Nochmer, and the question is stronger. Most of the time, and the ikir, the main amount of time, was Eden seine given in Midbar, that Eden were in the Midbar, seine sie given nit benesim in the Makom. They weren't in transit. They were in a state of encampment in the various different stops along the way. So when the pasuk is telling us how the Yidden traveled, the pasuk should have focused on the chaniyos, the stops. So this is going to be the question of the Sikha. Why does the pasuk say Masei? Why are we focusing on the journey aspect and not on the chaniyos, on the stops, especially since the psukim are speaking about the places where they stopped? So the Rebbe is going to suggest a number of answers along the way, and each one will be refuted until we get to the ultimate answer. Seemingly we can answer this based on an earlier Rashi. Frier is underlined, is highlighted, because very often Rashi relies on something he already explained previously for us to utilize that explanation later on in the Chumash. So this is a pasuk at the end of Parshas Pekudei, the end of Chumash Shmos. It says in the pasuk, "Yanan Hashem ala Mishkan Yoimam." The cloud of Hashem was on the Mishkan during the day. Ve'ishti alayla boy, and at night there was a pillar of fire. Le'inechol beis Yisrael, for everyone to see. B'chol Maseim, and all of their journeys. So af b'chol Maseim and all of their journeys in Sof Parshas Pekudei tights Rashi. Rashi says Mokim Chaniyasan, the place where they camped, Afu Kari Masa, is also called a Masa, a journey. V'chein ve'ela Masei, and he brings a raya in that Rashi in Pekudei from this parsha over here, where it says Masei, journeys, and it's talking about the places where they stopped. And then Rashi explains why is a stop called a journey. Because from the stop, that then launches the next leg of the journey. So the Nesiya, excuse me, is coming from the Chaniya. The journey is coming from the place where they stop to rest. Therefore, all of the stops are called journeys because those stops launch the journey. So it means the Masei includes both the traveling and the stopping. And therefore, Eila Masei, it doesn't just mean the journeys, it means the stops, and therefore makes perfect sense. Oh, but how good so the Rebbe says, however, this has to be explained. This itself demands an explanation. You're telling me that the place where they're camping or resting is called Masa, a journey, because from that place comes the next leg of the journey. Seemingly we should look at it the other way. The Vayachnu, the encamping, is actually the goal. Gemarun Abschluss from the Friedrich Vayiso. It is the culmination and the conclusion of the previous leg of the journey. In other words, the whole purpose of the journey is to get to the stop. So the journey is the means. The Vayachnu, the camping, is the end. So the Yisu, the journey is only a means to an end. So the Vayisu should be part of the Vayachnu nitfakert. The Vayachnu is the main thing here. So the Masa should be included in the Chaniya, not the Chaniya included in the Masa. Oich. There's another point to be made here. Even if you would say this, that for some reason the Masa, the word journey, includes also the camping that takes place between the one journey and the next. But it still doesn't answer our question in our case here in this parsha. Here the emphasis is on the camping, on the resting. First of all, those are the names of the places that are being listed. And then we explained previously in Ha'ara 2 that we're looking at the places where they stopped along the way, where they ate, where they slept, etc., etc. We're looking at the actual places where they stopped and camped. So even if Masei does mean a place of camping, it still here should not have been used. Because even if Masei could include the place of Chaniya, but literally, Masei means the journey, the Vayiso. She's nervous. It's just that it can also be used for the Makom Chaniya. But if we're focusing on the Makom Chaniya, then why say the word Masei, which also means Chaniya? Just say the word Chaniya. Chaniyos. So therefore, this Rashi in Parshas Pkudei that says that Masa means the Makom Chaniya is not a sufficient answer. Number one, because even if they're interchangeable, the ikir is the chaniya, not the masa. Number two, in this pasuk, in this parsha, we're focusing on the chaniyos. We're focusing on the stops. So why call them masei? Base. In Sif Base, the Rebbe is going to suggest another answer, and the Rebbe is going to suggest that the masei refers to the journey to Eretz Yisrael. That all of the stops and all of the legs of the journey were all part of one big journey towards Eretz Yisrael, and therefore even the stops are called Masei because they're details, they're parts of a journey to Eretz Yisrael. That's what the Rebbe is going to suggest, and then the Rebbe is going to refute that. The whole purpose, the goal of the traveling and the camping was to enter into Eretz Yisrael. The Tachlis is not given the Chaniyos. The goal was not the stops, nor the Vaita the Gemasa was to enter Eretz Yisrael, but rather the continuation of the journey that would bring them ever closer to Eretz Yisrael. So we can explain that it's for this reason that even the stops are called Masa journey, while the Chaniyos are because the stops are not an end unto themselves. Nor blaze an optional and hefsek after Ken and gain Vaita. They were only a break, a stop along the way to be able to travel further. As Rashi says, from the place where they camped, they continued to travel in the Richtung von Eretz Yisrael, in the direction of Eretz Yisrael. So Masei, in this answer, is referring to the overall journey to Eretz Yisrael and everything that happened along the way, both of the journeys, the parts of journeying, as well as the parts of stopping, were all part and parcel of the overall journey to Eretz Yisrael. And therefore it's called Masei. As Sabar Nidglatik, what this Rebbe says is not a clear, smooth answer. Why? Well, from them was up Masei la Masei, Lashon Rabbim. The fact that it says journeys in the plural is verstandig. From this we understand as the pasuk meant that the pasuk here is referring to nitim tzadashava from the Alam Asoyis und Zerteichen Kloli, not the common denominator of all of the stops or all of the journeys and their overall purpose. As is einen Allah chelek und stellen zusammen ein Massa von Eretz Mitzrayim ke Eretz Yisrael, that they're all part and put together one overall journey going from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael. That's clearly not the meaning over here because it says Masei in the plural. And going to Eretz Yisrael is really one journey. Could have said Ela Masa B'nei Yisrael, the journey to Eretz Yisrael. But it says Masei, he clearly is not referring to the overall theme and purpose of the journey as one. But rather that Inyan HaMiyuchas V'Yad Masa Bazunder. He's obviously referring to the uniqueness of each leg of the journey. Das was tilt up jeden Masse von the andere. The fact that each one was different than the other. Each leg of the journey was different than the other. Ukapidish Rashi, as Rashi said, and we mentioned this before, Kan Yoshananu, Kan Hoikarnu v'chulu. Here we slept, here we cooled off. Clearly, there's many different legs of the journey, with each one with their own unique role in the overall journey. And since the difference of the places is by the difference would be wherever they rested. Their gain, Masei is gleich. Going, traveling is the same, whether you're going from this destination or that destination. But the actual destinations and stops are going to be different. So this brings us back to our question. So why does the pasuk focus on the journeys and not on the stops? So we wanted to answer that we're talking about the journey to Eretz Yisrael. But we said we can't say that because it says Masei Lashon Rabim. Clearly it's referring to the individual journeys that took place along the way. But what stands out, what separates one from the other, is the chaniyos, is the stops. So why doesn't it say Eile chaniyos? In Siv Gimel, the Rebbe is going to bring a word from the Baal Shem Tov. And based on that, the Rebbe is going to possibly, you might want to suggest an answer based on that. And the Rebbe is going to say, Punkt Fakert, that the answer, that this actually intensifies the question. Since Bavuz Teres Baal Shem Tov is known the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. This is brought in the Sefer Degel Machne Ephraim. Degel Machne Ephraim was an enikul of the Baal Shem Tov. His name was Reb Moshe Chaim Ephraim, or Meir Chaim Ephraim. And he was a brother of Reb Baruch Mezhibush. He was the son of Odel, who was the daughter of the Baal Shem Tov, and her husband's name was Yechiel Michal Ashkenazi. So this is an enikul. The Degel Machne Ephraim was an enikul of the Baal Shem Tov, and he says this b'shem Adoni Avi Zikni, in the name of his grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov. Says Bavuz Teteres Baal Shem Tov of Eile Masse B'nei Yisrael as the Alim Mem Beis Masois and Faran Bayeder Eden. That the 42 journeys that this parasha speaks about actually exist within every single yid throughout the course of his life. Leaving Eretz Mitzrayim, Leides Adam. This refers to the birth of the person. Then throughout the days of his life, the course of his lifetime, Shar Hamasois, there are the rest of the various different journeys, which are different levels that need to be attained by him over the course of his life. Bizer kum zum Breg von Eretz HaChaim al Yoina, until he reaches the edge of the land of upper living, the land of true living, which is the life that's after the life on this earth, which is Eretz Yisrael in the Mashal. So the journey of the Yidden from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael and the various different stops along the way are a mashal to the journey of a person's life from birth until he reaches the ultimate life and the various different levels that have to be attained along the way. Und the Baal Shem Tov is masbir. The Baal Shem Tov explains, he gives an example. As Kivrei Sataiva, one of the places that the Yidden stopped was called Kivrei Sataiva. So the Baal Shem Tov explains, this is the level of Chachma that a person has to reach. What's the kasher between Kivrei Sataiva and Chachma? Kisham Kavru Asama Misavim. What happened in Kivrei Sataiva? There were people that had taiva, a temptation, a desire for meat, and then the Eibishter sent down the meat, and they ate the meat, but they died, and they were buried there. So the people of temptation were buried in that place. Pirush. So now in the Nimshul, if someone attains the level of Chachma, as I this takes away from him all of the temptations. Because of his intense devotion to Hashem. So Kivrei Sataiva is an example of a darga that a person could reach, level that a person could attain. And in this case, it's the level of Chachma where taivas die, where there's no more taivas anymore. Umavur, and it's explained in the Degel Machane Ephraim, as alle Masois and Bechinas Kedeshim Toidim, that all of the Masois are various different levels of holiness and purity which the person can and should attain. Even those Masois that in the actual story the Yidden conducted themselves against the will of Hashem, on their own, without looking at how the Yidden reacted to them, on their own, each of these Masois are lofty, holy levels. Just like the example that we brought from Kivrei Sataiva, as batul mimenu kol hatayvus menev v'kusa, the lashon is that it gets rid of all of the taivus because of his intense devotion to Hashem. It says nidnar nitakin taivus b'poil. Not only there isn't actual temptation, nor kavru geimer hamisavim. The temptation is buried. It says nidbegeden as al zayin shayach taivus. It's not even possible for temptation to come up. So we see that even though in the actual story it was a place where negative things happen, but they represent a very lofty level, a level where the taiva isn't even on the radar. So l'chayda, you could say this is why it says Eila Masei, because it's talking about the various different levels that a person has to reach, or should reach, or could reach during his lifetime, and therefore it says Masei, referring to the person's journey through life. However, the Rebbe says no, this is not an explanation. This actually makes the question stronger. Why is the word Masei used over here? According to this explanation that of the Baal Shem Tov, according to this Teres of Baal Shem Tov, that Masei is a reference, is a remes to the journey of the person, then it should have for sure focused on the stops. Which the stops represent the various different levels in serving Hashem, one above the next. Which these are the levels that a Yid has to attain by going from strength to strength throughout the course of his life. So the whole life is a journey, but along the journey there's all these different masois, all these different stops that a person should attain and reach and accomplish over the course of his life. So certainly we should focus on the chaniyos, which are the stops that the person has to make along the way of the journey of his own life. So therefore we're back to our original question. Why does it say Eila Masei? You can't answer that it's because Makim Chaniyos on Kari Masa, because number one, that itself needs to be explained. If Vayachnu is the ultimate goal, then we should call it Chaniyah. Especially here where we're focusing on the actual stops. You can't say that it's talking about Eretz Yisrael because the journey to Eretz Yisrael, because it says Masei, referring to the various different legs of the journey. Nor can you say that it's talking about the journey of the person's life. At this point, you can't say that, at least because since along the person's life, a person has to attain various different levels, it should have focused on those levels, which are the chaniyos, the stops that the Yidden made. The Rebbe is going to give the beer. And the beer is based on the status of Baal Shem Tov. Based on the fact that we're talking about the journey of the person, we'll understand why it's called Masei. Because they're saying that the desirable process of the person's life is, as by ihm soll ständig sein Masei, that he should constantly be in a state of journeying, of traveling. Soll sein am Mahalich, it should be someone who's moving, who's progressing. The Chassidus is mevarim chilik there's an amidah and hiluch and avodas Hashem, as we find in Chassidus, where it is explained the difference between standing, between being stagnant, and between going and progressing in avodas Hashem. Now, even amidah is also growth, because in avodas Hashem you can't be stagnant. There has to be growth. So then why is it called amidah? Because the growth is very slow and incremental. Amidah meint as ben steht auf en selben Ort. Amidah literally means you're standing in the same place. Even when you are ascending to the next level, it is not an aliyah be'erech, it is an ascent that is within the realm of the previous level. The new level that's being attained is related to, and therefore connected to, and therefore carries within it some of the previous level from which you're coming from. He hasn't really truly left the previous level, because the new level that he's reached is really still part of the previous level. One very practical example is you look at a child, a baby that's growing. So if you don't see the baby for a significant amount of time, for a few months, you'll come and you'll see how much the baby has grown. But if you see the baby every single day, it doesn't really look like they're growing. Because today compared to yesterday, even though there's always growth, is at such a tiny incremental growth that it's hardly recognizable. So if a person is growing so slowly that he's still within the same realm as the previous level, it's called amidah. It's called as if he's standing in one place, because the growth is not recognizable. Hiluch la'amitasei mate. On the other hand, if you're talking about going, hiluch, that means ahiluch va'aliyah shlei be'erech. Growing, progressing, ascending to a whole new level. As when gating ganz navek from the didiker madrega, you're totally away from the previous level. The hecher madrega is be'enadei hecher from the madrega in welcher es früher gestanden. And the new level, the higher level, is totally unrelated to the previous level from where you're coming from. And therefore it's called hiluch. You see a significant growth, not an incremental growth. And the Rabbi brings a few examples. For example, Fila Dargis B'Talmidim Zulamayla. Person has a bunch of students. So there's many different levels of students. Some are good students, some are not such good students, some are excellent students. But they're all within the realm of being students. Shaloi be'erech, but then there is a significant growth. When he becomes ordained, he becomes a rav or a dayan, a judge. That is a whole new level. He's not a Talmud anymore. Which within that itself there's many different levels. Then Eser Kedusha saying, another example from the Mishnah in Kalim, where the Mishnah says there's 10 different levels of holiness, meaning to say in the relation to the Beis Hamikdash, Eretz Yisrael, then there's Yerushalayim, then there's the Harabayis. Each place becomes holier and holier, and therefore has different dinim that apply to them with regards to the Kedusha. Hecher, aber be'erach von der Friedike. So there's 10 different levels, each one higher than the next, but still connected to the next. It's still within Eretz Yisrael, it's still on this earth. Shaloi be'erach, but compared to that, to go to something that's significantly higher, aliyah leGan Eden, to go into Gan Eden. So if you're in Eretz Yisrael and you go to Yerushalayim, you go to the Rabbi, you go to all the way to the Kedesh HaKadoshim, it's still all within this world. But then Gan Eden, it's a whole other level. You can't even compare. The room in the Gan Eden itself, there's very, very many different levels, one higher than the other until you reach the highest level. Within each level, there's many different levels, and then there's a jump to another level that is unrelated and disconnected from the previous level. That's hiluch. The Farzak, the pasuk Masei, and this is the answer to the question why the pasuk says Masei. Sumeram is designed to allude to us and to emphasize to us as a Izal sich nit obstellen und bleiben chaniye beim selben Sug aliyah und darga ledarga. A yid shouldn't stop. A yid shouldn't remain camped. A yid shouldn't remain resting, which means that he should stay within the same realm of ascension. Nur seine aliyah ist darf sein beefen as die zweite aliyah Masei is ogetilt. But the way he goes up, the way he grows, should be in a way that the new level, the masa, should be totally removed. With no relation to the previous one. Ahalicha mechayil el choyil, which is a growth from strength to strength. So Eila Masei b'nei Yisrael is telling us that a Yid is traveling through this world, through his lifetime. And often we go from step to step, but it's of incremental growth. So he says, Eila Masei. It has to be a hiluch, it has to be a movement, it has to be a progress, which is halicha shaloi bi'erech, something that is beyond the previous level, which is called halicha mechayil el choyil. And that's why it says Masei, to remind us to never be satisfied with small growth. We have to have significant growth in our life's journey. In Sif Hey, the Rebbe is going to take this a step deeper. Not only is there Amida and Hiluch, but in Hiluch itself, there's Hiluch and Nesiya. And what Eila Masei is telling us is that not only do you need to have Hiluch, you need to have Nesiya, as we'll explain. Atifrid inyan in them. Let's take this a step deeper. In the minyan for Alicha Mechayil El Choyil, Aliyah Shlei Be'erech, within the concept of going from strength to strength, which, as we explained before, means a significant growth, one that is not related to a level that's not related to the previous level. Within this version, there are two elements. There are two details, two aspects. Number one, you have to go away from the previous level. And then, and then you have to attain the new level, the higher level. And that's why there's a difference between these two terms, hiluch, going, and nesiya, journeying, traveling. Halicha is madgish beikar dem gain weiter auf Zukum und Hecher. Halicha focuses mostly on the fact that you're progressing. You're moving, you're going further to reach the next level. Nesiya is madgish, nicht nur dem gain weiter, nor euch dem Avweggehen von an Ort, vayisu me. Nesiya emphasizes not just the progress, but also the fact that you've walked away, you've moved away from the previous location. As we see in the parsha, every time it says Vayisu, they traveled from and they went to somewhere else. There always has to be the Vayisu is the traveling from. And it ever brings a few examples from Sukkim. V'yashteit Nisav v'neilecha. This is when Yankov and Esav have just met, and they're talking about going to Edom. So he says, Nisa, let us travel, which means to say, let us go from here, where we are now. V'neilecha, and let us go to Edom. Or another example, in Parshas Vayeshev, Nasu mizeh neilcha doisoina, where the Malach tells Yosef they traveled from here, they left here Shechem, and they said, we're going to doisoina. So the neilcha is where they're going. The nasu is where they're coming from. And as a matter of fact, Rashi actually says, Hisiyu asam min ha'achva. They moved away from the brotherhood. They not only did they move away from Shechem, but they moved away from the love of brothers to Yosef. And then there's another pasuk that Rabbi brings, Vayasa Moshe Yisrael mi Yamsuf. This is in the end of, towards the end of Parshas B'Shalach, after Kriyas Yamsuf, Moshe made them travel from the Yamsuf. They had to leave from the Yamsuf. Rashi actually says on that, Sion Bal Karcha, Moshe had to force them to go because of the Bizas Hayam, the loot of the water of the sea that was there at the time. Moshe had to pull them away. So we see that Vayasa means to leave from a place. Und der Farge findet man in Kama Psukim, and therefore we find in certain Psukim, as the Lashon Nosa hat in sich dem Teich abteich von Ocker. Now the word Nosa, as in it, the Teich, the translation to uproot. The Rebbe brings two examples in the Torah from the Navi Shoftim in the story of Shimshon. It says, Vayikatz mishnosoi, vayisa es hayisad ha'ereg. So the Mefarshim Taich, he woke up from his sleep and he uprooted the peg of the loom. Or another example that Rebbe brings is from Malachim Aleph, where it says, Vayitzav HaMelech, Shleim HaMelech commanded, Vayasiyu avonim gedolos avonim yekared liyased abayis, and they brought big stones and precious stones for the Beis Hamikdash. Rashi says, Vayasiyu min hahor. They took it out of the mountain, Lashon Akira. It's a Lashon of uprooting. They excavated it, these stone from the mountain to bring them to Yerushalayim for the Beis Hamikdash. So we see the word is, the Shayrish is Nasa, and the meaning is Okar, not just traveled or journeyed, but uprooted or left. V'al derech said, the Rebbe brings another example here. Nutzte Yerushalmi, b'makom de lashon v'hisiach daitei, where we would normally use the word hisiach daitei, he took his mind off of it. The Yerushalmi uses them oistruk, the expression hisiach daitei. His mind traveled from it. In other words, Hesach Hadas meant as the Machshavas V'das Adam is neker given from the free Inyan. What does Hesach Hadas mean? It means that the person's mind and thought was removed, was uprooted from the previous thing he was thinking about. And the Rebbe in the brackets brings a Raya of Milchus Tefillin, that how strong this concept of Hesach Hadas. As we find by the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, as einer nikra Hesach Hadas ela k'she'ema b'schayke kalas reish. When is you're not going to be Masei Das from your tefillin? What does it mean Masei Das? If a person is standing in laughter and making jokes or kalas reish, frivolity, that's called Hesach Hadas. But if a person is standing in awe, even if he's involved with his needs, and he's not thinking exactly about his tefillin in this moment, that's not called Hesach Hadas. And the Rebbe explains, if he's still in a state of awe, even though he's not thinking about the tefillin, is a nachnet agris of technik at tefillin. He's still not removed from what the tefillin is all about. The purpose of tefillin, putting on tefillin, the intent in putting on tefillin is to bind the heart and the mind to Hashem. So if a person is oimid b'yira, if his person is in awe to Hashem, then he's fulfilling the purpose of tefillin. And therefore it's not called Hesach Hadas. But if he's in a state of laughter or frivolity, versus hey tefillin, now you're already contrary to what tefillin is all about. Is it all Kirisn for the tefillin? At that point he becomes severed, removed from the idea of tefillin. When it says Hesach Hadas, that's Hesach Hadas. So Hesach Hadas doesn't just mean I'm not thinking about it. Hesach Hadas means I'm totally removed from it. Ukenal, the Yerushalmi Yiruftas on Hisiya Daitoi. And as we find, we said before, the Yerushalmi uses the word Hisiya, which are the same idea as Nisiya, because that is what Nisiya, traveling, journeying, does. It lifts the person, not lifts, it takes the person away from the previous location. So from this we see that Nisiya means to uproot oneself from where they are, and therefore we'll see this a little bit more in the end of Sivav. But already here we can already understand the direction that we're going in, that not only is the person have to have a hiluch and not an amida, that he should go and not be stagnant or not even have only incremental growth, but he has to have an nesiya. He has to lift himself and remove himself from the previous level. And to emphasize this, or understand this a little bit better, the Rebbe in Ara 22 brings the example from Chassidus between hiluch and diluk. Hiluch is to go, diluk is to jump. So think about for a second, if a person wants to go up the steps. We're talking about going mimadrege limadrege. You want to go up the steps. So what's the normal way of going up the steps? You take one foot and you put it on the next step. Then you take the other foot, you put it on the step after that. At every given time, your first foot is still on the previous step. You don't take both feet off the bottom step before you get to the next step. Because that is called incremental growth. Even though we said hiluch means aliyah shalei be'erech, but still, because at least you're going on to a new step, but you're still connected somewhat to the previous step. Diluk means that you lift both feet, you jump. You lift both feet off the step one, and you jump onto step two. This means that you're totally removing yourself, even before you get to step two, you're leaving the first step. You're going away from the first step. That's called diluk. So, in the context of the Sikha, you have hiluch and nesiya. That's the concept. Nesiya means to totally uproot yourself from the previous level. And this would be why it says, Masei b'nei Yisrael, that when a person journeys through life, he has to not be satisfied by making progress, but there also has to be the idea of nesiya, that every once in a while you have to leave the previous level. In Siv Vav, the Rebbe is going to elaborate on this by bringing in another word from the Alter Rebbe, and we'll see a little bit more what it means to leave the previous level. And then the Rebbe will conclude in Siv Vav, going back to the word Eila Masei. This also explains the pasuk Eila Masei b'nei Yisrael. These are the journeys of the Yidden that they went from Mitzrayim. Masei loshen rabim. And as we've said many times, here Masei is being said in the plural. The Rebbe asks a question. Mit dem ersten Masa, mit Ramses the Sukkos, the very first journey from Ramses to Sukkos, the Yidden were already out of Mitzrayim. So why does he say that through the journeys, in plural, the Jews left Mitzrayim? Once the Yidden came to Sukkos, they were done with Mitzrayim. From then they went from Sukkos to the next place, and then to the next place. But then not every journey was from Mitzrayim. It's mashma from the pasuk that Masei, that all the journeys are from Mitzrayim, and really only the first journey was from Mitzrayim. So why does it say Masei asher yotzu me'eretz Mitzrayim? And the Alter Rebbe answers in Likutei Torah, as Mitzrayim is from Lashon Meitzer Gvul. Mitzrayim comes from the word Meitzer Gvul, the constraints, the limitations of a person. Kozman says, and as long as they don't reach the ultimate level, which is the Yarden, near the city of Yericho, they're still within the Mitzrayim, Meitzarim Gvulim, they're still within their own constraints. They have not gotten out of that yet. And therefore they're not truly removed from the land of Mitzrayim, because they're still in the Mitzrayim Gvulim. So point one is that every single journey was going from Mitzrayim, which means they were journeying away from their own Mitzrayim Gvulim, their own personal limitations and constraints. And then every single one was a Yitzias Mitzrayim, given a Yitzia from the Meitzer Gvul from the Friedrich Chania. It was leaving or gaining an exodus from the limitations and the constraints of the previous level. When he reached Chania number 14, it was a Yitzias Mitzrayim from the previous Chania. But now, and therefore it was out of those Mitzrayim Gvulim, but now they're new Mitzrayim Gvulim. And therefore he needed to have a new Nisiya in order to get away from this Chania, in order to get away from the Mitzrayim Gvulim of this place that he was in that he's in at that time. And therefore the pasuk says, Elam Masei. The Chania is the degrechte madreges navedes Hashem. These stops along the way, which represent the levels that he already attained in serving Hashem. Is not yet the culmination and the completion of going out of Mitzrayim. As darf sein der Aroizgehen von Mitzrayim und Gvulim für jeder Chania. He has to go out of the limitations and the constraints of each individual stop along the way. From Bleiben in Iraq Bolo, you shouldn't get stuck in this new constraint of the new place. I feel the Kedusha, even the Meitzarim of Kedusha, even sometimes from the perspective of Kedusha, it can hold you back from the ultimate freedom. Man stellt sich nicht up, and therefore you can't stop by one specific accomplishment. When you stop, there has to be, again, this is a quote from the Rashi and Pkudei, they continue traveling. There has to constantly be the journey, because you constantly have to go out of the new Mitzrayim Gvulim. A person accomplished something, and compared to where he was yesterday, it's an incredible accomplishment. But now if he stays there, then that's not an incredible accomplishment anymore. So, and the next day, he has to leave the accomplishments of yesterday and find a new level, a higher level. And that's why it says Masei in the pasuk, not just referring to the overall journey of the person through life, not just to tell us that a person has to have a halicha, michayil il chayil, but every single time he reaches a certain level and he freed himself from the Meitzarim Gvulim of the previous level, he now has to go to a new freedom to get out of the Meitzarim Gvulim that he currently finds himself in, and that is the message of the word Masei. Pretty much at this point we have answered the question in a very practical Avedis Hashemdik way. The Rebbe is going to add one more nakuda as this applies to Golus and Gula. That ultimately, also on a cosmic level, Masei b'nei Yisrael is the journey through Golus as we get to the Geula, and every Yerida, every Chania, which could be seen as a Yerida, as a descent, as a low, is actually there in order to lift the person up to a Geula until the ultimate Geula. There's another aspect to this. Siaduas the Beis Masei in Midbar and the Remes of the Mizman Galus. It's known that the 42 journeys of the Yidden in the Midbar represent the time of Galus. When Yidden gefinnen sich in Midbar Ha'amim, when Yidden find themselves in the desert of the nations. Kommt us as the Chaniyas in Midbar haben in sich an Inyan von Yidden Galus. In that case, this would mean that the Chaniyas, the stops in the Midbar, represent the descent, represent the Galus and the hardships of Galus. Das was verhält sich in the fact that we are still detained in the desert of the nations. Every time they stop, the men they're still in the midbar. They haven't gotten to Israel yet. Certainly, those stops that were in places where the Yidden angered Hashem, certainly represent a Yerida, a falling. But nevertheless, even these chaniyas, as we said earlier, even the chaniyas where the Yidden did things that they shouldn't have done, they're still referred to as a Masei, which represents growth and journey. The explanation is the kavanah b'tachas when the Yidden in Galus is the Gulus lachreah. The whole purpose of the Galus, of the descent of Galus, is the redemption that follows it. Yiridah tzerech aliyah, as we know, that the descent is for the purpose of an ascent. But dafka durch the Yiridah v'tuf ketan aliyah, and because of the Yiridah, because of the descent, you can able to accomplish the ascent. And the ascent is even higher than it was before the descent, as we know. That when the oil comes from the cheshach, when the light comes from the darkness, the light is even greater. Al-Pizah is moving from this we can understand, as the Yerida in Galus is a chelik from the close dikar aliyah of tzukum to yarden yereche, that the fact that we have to go down into Galus is actually part of the overall ascent, which is leading us to the yarden of Yericho, v'b'chinas hareach, which represents the level of smell. The Gilui from Mashiach, which as is explained in Chassidus, that level of smell refers to the revelation of Mashiach. Was wird sein who Mashiach will be. Un men proved him ois durch and will be tested with this. Meirach v'doin, he will smell and judge. He will be able to judge through smell. Chassidus explains the level of smell, but what it means meirach v'doin. But reach, which is a the same etymology as Yericho or as Yarden Yericho is represents Mashiach. So the end of the journey is the Geula. And every time there's a stop in Golus, a Yerida of Golus, it's actually part of the Aliyah as we head to the ultimate destination, which is Yericho, which is Yarden Yericho, which is Mashiach. And even when a Yid falls, he makes a mistake. And he does something that's against the will of Hashem. He's not allowed to fall into despair. He has to accomplish the light. There should be more light because it's coming from the darkness of the fall. It should be an idea of journeying upward and growth. The Yisuf and Tshuva, which is the greatness of Tshuva. When the fire and Masei. This is why the Torah refers to it as Masei, even though it wasn't all so wonderful. Because on a deeper level, on a concealed level we can't yet see, this is the beginning of something very beautiful. This is the beginning of growth. This is the beginning of the Geula. And therefore, even though it was a stop, it was a Chaniyah, but it was really a Masei. It was really part of the journey to the Geula. This is one more nekuda in the idea of Masei, that not only is it referring to the journey of a Yid through life, it's also referring to the journey of Klal Yisrael through Galus, and that ultimately we're going to reach the Geula, and every stop and every stumbling block along the way that pulls us down, that drags us down, is actually part of Masei. It's part of the ultimate journey and Aliyah and ascent to the Geula. In the Sivches, the Rebbe concludes that with this we now we understand the connection to the time of the year that we read this parsha. And based on this, we can also understand the connection of Parshas Masei to the time when this parsha is read in Bein HaMetzarim. It's always read between Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, the time when we mourn for the Churban Beis HaMikdash. And it's usually in close proximity to the Chedes Menachem Av. For example, this year, Tafshin Pei Gimel, we will be reading Masei on Shabbos Mevarchim Av, and das is Me'odet Yidden because it's all there to encourage us, to give us encouragement. They can detect from Ben HaMetzarim as we go into these days. of Bein HaMetzarim, befrat the Tes Yom, especially 9 days. Masei b'zechanu shchidus menacham, which begin as shchidus menacham of. Was the modern Aiden, them Gedla Yid from them Galus Achrim, which reminds the Yid of how deep we've fallen of the descent of this final Galus. So he should not be influenced to fall into despair from the bitterkeit, from the matzav galus, from the bitterness of the galus situation. This is all for the purpose of transforming it and changing it. Was bringt them durch Hashem. When we do ishapcha, when we transform this world on our end, this brings that Hashem should fulfill that I will transform their mourning into joy. So an inyan from Masei and Aliyah to a concept of, to a place of Masei, of journeying ever higher, of growing, of ascending. Und der Fahrt darf in die Tagen b'miyuchad meisiv sein. In Chayis v'is la'avos v'oir. Therefore, in these days specifically, a person has to increase in his vitality, in his passion, in his excitement in light. Mit mer lebendigkeit und mer lichtigkeit, with more liveliness, or more vitality, and more light. V'ein oir l'teira. And where do you find this light in Torah? As the pasuk says, "Ki ner mitzvah Torah is light," and the Rebbe in Order 34 emphasizes, especially learning Hilchas Beis HaBchira, which is as if a person is involved in building the Beis HaMikdash, and ein binyan Beis Batel, and therefore the building of the Beis HaMikdash will never stop. When a person is with chayis and with hisla'avos and with light and the light of Torah, this illuminates these days of Bein HaMetzarim, and then reveals the ascent and the journey and the growth that comes from this. Because the Masa Ikri, until the ultimate destination, that these days will be transformed to joy, to jubilation, and to great festivals. May it be speedily in our days.